Hi friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about my star rating system and how I rate books. And so this video is very much inspired by Angela from Literature Science Alliance, and I know that lots of people have done this video, but I just watched Angela's a few days ago and I really liked how she communicated about her rating system and like the combination of things that come together for her to like give each rating a usefulness to her and like a way to communicate the way that she enjoys a book. So I thought that I would write down like my own thoughts on my rating system and my own notes, and I wanted to discuss it, so I decided that I would also make this video. I will of course have Angela's video and channel linked in the description because her video was amazing and I doubt that I will be able to communicate myself nearly as well as she does, but I do want to give it a shot. So first I'm just going to go through a few of the factors that impact how I rate a book, and then I'll try and break down kind of what each star rating actually means to me. And I just use Goodreads, so I end up rounding to whole star numbers even if I actually like feel a 0.5. I will round whichever direction feels appropriate, but I will always put my actual rating at the top of my review if it's different from what the whole star indicates. So I did come up with a list of factors, and the very first one that I have on the list is a little bit obvious, but that is just enjoyment. So I rate based on enjoyment. I generally don't try to analytically like take apart a book and look at it in that lens. I will like think about those things, but generally I am literally just worried about how much I enjoyed myself, and so these other factors kind of are subsets of my enjoyment and things that impact my enjoyment. So the first thing that I put down is emotional response, and this is definitely something that your mileage may vary on, because I know that some people are not super emotional readers or like emotional consumers of media in general. Like I know that a lot of people just say they don't really cry like reading books, watching movies, or things like that. And it's not necessarily just crying that you think of when you talk about emotion, but I very much am that. Like it's pretty common for my emotions to be influenced, and so the emotional response is actually a really good litmus test for me, because if I am invested in the story and I am enjoying it, I'm a lot more likely to respond emotionally, and if I'm just not getting that connection, then something like that's supposed to be devastating could happen in a book and it will not get an emotional response from me just because I wasn't like fully invested, fully immersed, like whatever have you. So that's why that is a really good indicator for me. And then the second thing that is similar in some ways but not quite the same is my immersion during the reading experience. So I am not someone who thinks in images. I am not able to like vividly picture what I'm reading. For me, it is I can picture a little bit. I have to make a concerted effort to picture things, and it's mostly just words on a page. So for me, the writing style of an author and the way that they craft their scenes matters, because I can tell in my experience if I feel really immersed based on their word choices and their style, etc. There's a big difference for me where I find myself being able to picture the scenes more easily, being able to like literally immerse myself. Whereas if a style of writing isn't doing that for me, then I will feel less inside of a book. And it really will feel just like words on a page if it doesn't have that. The next thing that I wrote down on my list in all capital letters is characters, because holy crap, a year and a half ago I may not have known how to categorize myself, but now I know for certain that I am like 110% a character reader, because I have read books that have plots that by all accounts are really cool and really engaging, but if you do not get me to care about your characters, I may as well just stop. Like, because I can't get over that hump of getting invested. I do find a fun and fast-paced plot like fun to follow, but then for me it never really becomes more than that. It just becomes something that was fun to read while I was reading it, but doesn't tend to have a lasting impact on me. And if you do have great characters, like if you're someone like Robin Hobb, for example, you will have me thinking about what you wrote forever and ever. So there is a huge impact on me in terms of characters, and that is one reason why I don't tend to mind slow-paced things, because if we're getting great character work, I am good. I'm perfectly good. So next up, I have innovation of ideas, and then under this, I put magic systems and world building. And so having innovative ideas does not always have to do with your magic system and your world building, but I find in fantasy that that is often the case. And so I don't always need an author to be doing something new and unique with their story, but I like it when, if they're using something familiar, they're at least doing it in a new and unique way, if that makes sense. And the reason why I have those two factors there is because, like, often the way that they're able to do that is through a unique magic system, or there's something different about their world. Like, it feels very individual and you can feel that you're there, and it doesn't feel the same as like other worlds that you've read before. And that definitely is part of what captures me. It doesn't always have to be new and different, but it's definitely like a good thing and something that I like when it is. And then last on my list, I have some quote-unquote objective criteria. And obviously, like, I say objective that way because I don't really believe that anything about reviewing is objective, but what I mean when I say this is sort of like the style of prose. You can objectively tell whether a style of prose is simple or more flowery. You can tell whether sentences are constructed really well, and whether dialogue feels clunky or whether it flows, and it's sort of things like that, or whether you think the author achieved what they were trying to do with the story. Even if you didn't like it, you might objectively be able to say, yeah, like I think they did a good job of doing what they were getting at. So I don't really rate those things as highly in terms of my enjoyment, but it still does factor in a little bit if I'm considering a wider variety of factors. So I'm sure there are more things, but every book can be so different that when I read something, it really is just a unique combination of factors every single time that combine to tell me whether I loved it or where I fall on that scale of my rating system. So now I'm kind of going to get into what each star rating actually means to me, and I tend to not be too tough of a critic, and this is mostly because I only pick up things that I'm really excited about and that I think I'm really gonna love. I don't tend to, or at least I haven't gotten to the point yet in my reading career where I'm stepping out into the unknown too much. I'm pretty much reading things that are tried and true rather than like the completely untested new books that I know nothing about. So I think that that partially factors into my higher ratings, but also I'm kind of just like easy to please in a way, because if I'm enjoying something, I'm not shy about rating it highly. But with that being said, let's get into each of the star ratings. So I'm gonna start at the top with 5 stars, and simply put, a 5-star book for me is any book that I loved. I know that some people reserve 5 stars for their all-time favorites, but I don't do that. I think that I'm able to parse through my all-time favorites based on the lasting impact that a book has on me, and if a book does not end up having a lasting impact, then I may go back and decrease my rating. But if I truly love a book while I'm reading it, then I have no qualms about giving it 5 stars. I'm not stingy with the number of 5 stars that I give out or anything like that. 2 things that I feel are really important for a 5-star book for me is that I was connected to the characters, invested in their journeys and like basically would die for them. Like I love the characters. So that portion, like where I talked about how characters are important to me, that is a huge thing for a 5-star book. And then the second one is that the book elicits a lot of emotion from me, because like I explained, that is a really, really good indicator of how connected I'm feeling and how much I'm really like loving watching the story unfold. And an underrated part of a 5-star book for me is that often it happens when the characters are flawed. I like reading about characters that are fundamentally flawed but good people, because that to me makes a really great character journey when you watch them make mistakes and grow. Then another good indicator of a 5-star read for me is that I felt compelled to keep reading and I felt really immersed in the book while I was reading it. I didn't have to force myself to pick it back up. It was always something that I wanted to be reading. And something that contributes to this but is a separate point is I really like it when I can feel the tension building in a story and feel the stakes in the story. And this kind of has to do with pacing, where even if the pacing is slow or fast, it still has to be constructed properly, that you can feel where you are in the story and you can feel when you're building to a climax of a story. And when an author is able to do that well, that is a really, really huge X factor, in my opinion, for having the story just feel right to me. And I think that that often relates to having nice prose and well-constructed writing, because the author is just drawing the reader along through the story exactly how they want you to be feeling. And then finally, like I mentioned, books don't always have to have innovative ideas for me to love them, but often a 5-star book will have done something unique that I really, really love. And a lot of the times, a lot of my enjoyment comes from really cool magic systems and really cool world building, and just like these deep, expansive worlds that you can sink into, like worlds that I want to return to and that I love being in, and magic systems, like things that are so detailed and so well explored that they just feel real. So when you return to that world, you feel immersed. And so all of these things kind of connect together in a way. And you know, a book can have all of these things, but it still needs that X factor for me to love it and for me to consider it 5 stars. So 5 stars is a little bit hard to explain, but I think that it's important that it has all of these things, and that's kind of the best way that I can explain it. So next up is 4.5 stars, and this is a really short explanation because basically a 4.5 star book for me is a book that has a lot of the similar things that a 5-star book has, but just not quite doing it as well, basically. Maybe I loved the book, but there was just one thing that bothered me. Like, I can think of one book in particular that I loved throughout the whole book, and then near the end there was a choice made that I was like, why did you do that? Like, I didn't like that. But overall, I still loved the book. And so it just got dropped down like 1/2 star for me. So often 4.5 stars are still books that I loved, but just not quite on the same level as a 5-star. It is still a phenomenal book. So 4 stars. For me, a 4-star book is generally a book that I really, really enjoyed, but can't quite say that I loved. And often a situation that I'll find myself in where I'm giving a book 4 stars is if I really liked the characters and plot, but I couldn't quite connect to the characters on the same level as I would for a 5-star read. And it's again that X factor where sometimes I can't quite explain what made me either really, really be on the same wavelength or not, but it just happens and then I can feel it when it does happen. A 4-star book will generally still make me feel some like emotions, but not as strongly as a 5-star book would. And it could also be a book that has pacing issues or some other thing that take me out of the immersion of reading it. So even if I'm really enjoying it, it wasn't that higher level experience where I was really, really compelled to finish it the whole way through. And then finally, a 4-star book could also be a book that I recognize as well written and I like what it's doing, but I wasn't quite actually enjoying my time reading it. And I feel this way about some classics. I don't tend to rate classics as highly unless I really connect to the writing style, but that's just one example where if I like what a book is doing in theory, but I don't quite enjoy the experience of reading it, then that can sometimes be a 4-star as well. 3.5 stars is a tricky one because it's often pretty similar to 4 stars, but with more noticeable issues. Like maybe it's dialogue or prose or something that takes me out of a groove while reading, and dialogue is one thing in particular that can really make or break a book for me, because when dialogue is done well, you tend to not notice it at all. But then when dialogue is not done well, it's so hard not to think about it at all times and just be like, this isn't how people would talk. And I can never get that out of my head. So that is an example of what could drop a book in rating for me. And then again, characters are super important. So a 3.5 star is probably a book where I could not connect with the characters super well, and therefore I would feel less tension, less stakes, and less emotion while reading it, even though it was still like a good book. And it can also be books that are good and enjoyable but don't feel unique or special. So if I feel like a book is a fun time but not anything that is making me think, or not something that's approaching tropes in a new way, then it probably just doesn't get that higher rating from me. Next up we have 3 stars, which for me is just a perfectly fine book. And it is actually rare, like very rare, for me to give below a 3-star. And I don't even actually give out many 3 stars because a lot of the times I'm picking up books that I'm really enjoying. But when I think of a 3-star book, I think of something that I enjoyed enough to finish while I was reading it, but it really wasn't anything special aside from in the moment. Like, I don't care that much about it, and I know that it won't have the staying power. And sometimes, even if I'm really enjoying something while I'm reading it, it will still be a 3-star if I view it as sort of like a popcorn book, something that I don't care about on a deeper level, and I know that I won't reread, and I know that I won't really remember it after I'm finished with it. So those are all kind of things that make a book a 3-star, where it's not exactly a negative rating, but it's also just kind of an I don't care overly much about this book, like it was okay. 2.5 stars, I don't really have an explanation for, because I feel like this would be really rare. Often, I think if I was in that range, I would be rounding up to a 3 or rounding down to a 2. That's not to say that there's never going to be a situation where I rate something 2.5 stars, but I'm just not sure what would even really make a book 2.5 stars for me. But 2 stars is a little bit easier to nail down because it's a book that was probably mostly fine, but a book that I just felt absolutely nothing towards. Either that, or I felt slight negative emotions towards it. So it likely also has elements that I actively disliked, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I hated the whole book. Just that there wasn't really anything that I was liking either. A 2-star book would not give me a sense of immersion or an emotional connection, and I would not really feel compelled to keep reading it or feel too much enjoyment while reading it. And another possibility for a 2-star would be an average book with a bad ending. So if I'm feeling like a book is a 3, but then it just has an ending that I don't like at all, it would probably drop. Although that could be an instance where I would give a book 2.5. It definitely just depends on the ending. And my main emotions reading a 2-star book are probably annoyance or maybe apathy, not positive emotions, let's just say that. And instead of proceeding to 1.5 and 1 star, I'm actually just jumping straight to DNF because I have not yet run into a situation where I have actually finished a book and felt like giving it less than 2 stars. Like, if I'm really, really not enjoying something that much, I will most likely just stop reading it. And I haven't DNF'd very many things, but I have decided that a couple of times, and it's like if I'm really not enjoying something, there are so many other books literally that I'm clamoring to read at any given moment. So I will just drop it and I will move on to one of those other ones. And I mean, I could see a situation where for some reason the ending of a book is so offensive to me that it drops it way down, but I just haven't had that happen yet. So I can't really properly explain what would make a book 1.5 or 1 stars for me. So if you've followed me for a while and you follow me on Goodreads, you probably know that I do tend to rate things pretty highly, and I do consider myself lucky to be loving most of what I'm reading, but this is my breakdown of how I try to rate things, and of course every book is different, but I do find it useful to put them into their categories and to go back and look at the trends and how I change as a reviewer. So I thought that this was really fun to write out my thoughts, and once again you should definitely go check out Angela's version of this video that inspired this. And yeah, I think that that's all that I have to say, so I would really love to know what your rating system is or what your thoughts are on this down in the comments. And please like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you would like to see more content from me. I post new videos every Monday and Thursday, and I will have information about my Patreon and joint Discord down in the description, and I will see you in my next one. I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye! I want to say a big thank you to my latest apprentice librarian, Victor or Vic Swordsman.